Hello, welcome to another episode of Varsity360. I'm Columbian sports editor Micah Rice, joined today by Tim Martinez, and we're going to discuss a change in the high school football postseason landscape. But as always, we're coming to you from the First Pacific Financial Studio. Thank you to them for supporting the show, for supporting high school sports and the community at large all year, because I was looking, we're up almost to 40 episodes that we've done this academic year. We made a commitment to say that while sports are happening from the fall all the way through the spring, we wanted to touch base with you on different topics every week, and we've done that, and we've covered a lot of ground, so we continue to do that.
Yeah, and we're heading towards the end of the school year. It's we're hitting the postseason now for a lot of sports, and I think it's like maybe this week and 2 more weeks after that, and we're in the state championship weekend. So it's really quite getting to the end of things here. And
then, of course, it all culminates with our All-Region Award Ceremony, June 5th at the Kiggins Theater. 4-time Olympian Kara Winger, who many of you know from being a Skyview track and field standout, who went on to great things in her professional javelin throwing career. She will be the featured speaker. So we're really looking forward to that event. Of course, we'll share the link in the bio of this episode for you to get tickets, but it'll be a fabulous celebration of all the athletes. So be sure to join us June 5th at the Kiggins Theater. But beyond June 5th, looking ahead to next fall, there will be a change in high school football Week 10 playoffs. As those of you who follow the sport know, Week 10 was traditionally a district crossover. So teams within District 4 would crossover against each other, Greater St. Helens League teams against Evergreen Conference teams, Trico League teams against Evergreen Conference teams. But Tim, that is now changing. Why don't you tell us what the decision is and how that's going to impact high school football?
Yeah, this is a change that the Washington State Football Coaches Association has been kind of lobbying for, I think, for a few seasons now. So they've been trying to, gain support, and they really made a concerted effort this off season to poll their members and propose this change to coaches across the state. And they sent out for all classifications, and really overwhelming support from the coaches, from like 75-80% positive. So they took the Coaches Association took this information and this support and this plan to the district athletic directors. So it's a group of athletic directors who represent all 9 WIAA districts, and they have regular meetings to talk about issues. And so the decision had to come from that level, not from the WIAA, because the WIAA runs the state tournament. They run the state tournaments, and so these are games that are qualifying teams into the state tournament. And so it had to come from the district levels, and so they had to get all the districts to agree to do this statewide crossover. It's very similar to what the 3A has been using for several years now, I think almost close to a decade, where all the districts, they take their berths and they kind of combine them, and then they play off in that Week 10. So 3A Greater St. Helens League teams, they could play, usually at Week 10 they're playing, I think like Mountain View this last year played, I believe it was Edmonds Woodway. Other teams can go up and play like Seattle teams or Seattle Prep or Bellevue, or I think a few years ago Evergreen went all the way over and played Kamayakan over in the Tri-Cities. So it's kind of a statewide crossover. The 4A kind of does something similar, except it's only the western 4 districts. So there's District 1. District 1 is up in like Everett north to the Canadian border is kind of District 1. District 2 is kind of Seattle area, and also on the east side of the Lake Washington, like Redmond and Bellevue and all the communities over there. District 3 is Tacoma area, Tacoma, Federal Way, Auburn, Kent, Puyallup. And then District 4 is down here in Southwest Washington, basically from Tumwater all the way down to the Columbian and into the gorge to White Salmon. And actually, it goes up the Olympic Peninsula all the way up to Forks. So you could have, Forks playing Columbia White Salmon. There have been district playoffs featuring those 2 teams. So in the 4A, those 4 districts would cross over, but the teams on the east side of the state, they had their own qualifying things. But this year, they're going to all come together and mix and match those Week 10 matchups. And it's going to be also done at the 2A level and the 1A level. So we're going to see some interesting Week 10 matchups. You're not going to see the La Center versus Elma or Montesano versus Castle Rock or Tumwater versus, I think it was Richfield last year, always that fourth place team when the Victoria St. Helens League knows they got to play Tumwater. That won't necessarily be the case. You could still play teams from your own district in this crossover, but more often than not, you're going to play somebody from another district, from District 3 or District 2, 1 over on the east side. So an interesting change, and it's interesting also to kind of see how it all kind of works and comes together.
Well, it's going to be really interesting to see, especially I believe in the 2A and the 1A, because those are the classifications where those crossovers were really the most clear cut. You have let's say the 2A, you have the 2A GSA champ goes against the number 4 team from the Evergreen Conference, the number 2 in the 2A GSHL against number 3 in the Evergreen Conference, vice versa, all the way down to, we always kind of joked, it's kind of a bittersweet thing to finish 4th in the 2A Greater St. Helens League, because on one end, you're really happy that you made the postseason and you extended your season. On the other end, in football, that usually means a trip up to Tumwater, which hasn't gone too well for teams from down here. But now the process goes, I believe it's districts are going to make recommendations for kind of what games they want to see, but it all gets funneled into one area, and that is the Lake Washington School District Athletic Director, John Applegate, who has been tasked with coming up with the Week 10 matchups. And so, districts can kind of say, hey, here's what we prefer, but it's really going to come down to one clearinghouse to set up these Week 10 games.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that's going to be different, because again, like you said, in the previously when it was the district playoffs in district in 2A and 1A, you kind of knew what the matchups were once the leagues were settled out. It's like, I think last year Woodland won in Week 9, clinched the league title. They knew they were going to play the number 4. I think it ended up being like Rochester or something like that. So they kind of knew that. You knew on Friday what the matchups, because all right, Woodland's going to play this team. They're going to be at home on Friday, and they would usually announce that. Mm-hmm. Well, now, because everything's got to go through this clearinghouse and it's going to follow the protocol that's been used at the 4A and 3, those matchups don't get announced until Sunday. So you won't even know who you're playing until Sunday, and then you might not even know where or when you play until maybe Monday sometimes, because it's hard to get communications to find out. So that'll be one, interesting twist for coaches, for fans who maybe want to travel. They don't know where they're going to go. Like you said, the 4th place team from the 2A GSHL knows, we're heading to Tumwater next Friday. Now it could be, we're heading to Linden, or something like that. So that'll be an interesting change. And then I think the other thing too is it kind of opens up. I think there are some districts in the league in the state that are stronger at football than other districts. And I know up in the northwest corner in 2A, they would always, every year, the state pairings would be announced, and they were always very grumpy because that district would receive every year 2 bursts to the state. And the burst, the way the WI, they do it proportionally. So if, for instance, there are 64 schools in Class 2A, and your district has 8 schools in it, that is, 1/8 of all the schools in that classification. So you're going to receive 1/8 of the 16 bursts, which would be 2. So it's all based on proportions, the size of your league. Well, up there, those 8 teams, they might be like really, really good, where the 3rd place team, the 4th place team are some really good teams, and they don't ever get a chance to go to state. And I think they've been sort of advocating, because the only way for those districts to they would kind of look and see what's happening at the 3 and the 4A and go, hey, why can't we do something like this? And so, the reluctance from other districts is like, maybe you're not as strong, and it's kind of like, well, maybe we don't want to play that Week 10 because now maybe some of our teams won't get through and go to state. That's sort of the risk. But I think overall for fans across the state, it's a good situation, because I think it'll kind of help weed down, and we can get to the 16 best teams.
Yes.
in the state tournament, and then hopefully the 8 best teams and so on down the line. I think that's what fans want to see as they kind of move down the line.
Well, in changing this, you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to inherent advantages of teams that place well in their leagues. There are going to be considerations given to league championship teams. So if, for example, you win your league, you're most likely playing at home or close to home in that week 10 game. And then they haven't changed where after week 10, everybody who's still playing, the 16 teams that make the state tournament proper, those go to a seeding committee.
Right. So it's not like a bracket of 32. It's not like, have a team seeded 1 playing the team seeded 32, and they're just going to move on down. There's going to be these 16 games in week 2, and the 16 teams are going to win, and then the seeding committees from the WIA will go through and seed those teams. And so I think a lot of the information that they get from those week 10 results will help them shape those decisions that get made. So I think that will also kind of help, get a better seeding of the final 16.
How much consideration do you think is going to be given to geographic location? You mentioned the possibility that you might have a team from Southwest Washington go up to Bellingham or over to the east side. That's certainly a possibility if that's what matchup is decided in this Week 10 clearinghouse that everybody's going to go through. But how much do you think the districts are going to advocate to simplify logistics, to cut down on travel costs, to make it easier for our fans to go on the road and follow? Could you maybe do us a favor and put us sort of in the same division, or same area of the state, which, while that opens up certainly some matchups that weren't possible in the old format, you might end up with some matchups that are familiar.
Yeah, that's very possible. I think, I think the 3A model is kind of the model that they're working off of, because they were doing this week 10 statewide thing. But the difference in 3A is that the majority of schools in the 3A classification are on the west side of the state. Mm-hmm. And so there are very small numbers of teams. I think, of the 16 teams that would advance to the state tournament, before they would have this week 10, it would proportionally kind of come like 14 of the bursts would come from the west side and maybe 2 from the east side. So it's hard to kind of judge, because there are so few east side teams in 3A, how that dynamic is going to work at the other levels, because at 4A and definitely down in 2A and 1A, there is a wider sort of distribution of schools statewide. And so, the chances of like a La Center playing a Connell or Mount Baker or anyone around the state is more of a possibility. So I kind of feel like, that's part of it we kind of don't know right now, but I kind of feel like they will probably try to find matchups that will sort of limit some of the travel when they can. If they see a matchup, it's like, well, we got this team playing this team from way over here. Well, maybe if we shift and we have this team play this team and this team play this team, they'll probably look for opportunities to do that if they feel like it doesn't throw off any of the competitive balance or imbalance.
Yeah, I would get the sense that geography isn't going to be the main driver of what Week 10 matchups happen, and more competitive balance. I think they're going to put teams into certain pools, like, okay, here's a team, their resume is they're a league champion, their RPI is really high. We need to find a team that also qualified, that maybe is
sort of the mirror opposite.
Maybe a team that just got in. If you have a team at the very head of the pack, let's make sure they get paired against a team that maybe just barely got in. And then, as you win your way down, you're going to have in the middle of the 32 team field some teams that are, okay, that's a middle seed. Let's put them against a middle seed. And maybe there's a situation where, okay, there's another middle seed 400 miles away, or there's a middle seed 150 miles away. They're going to try with to match them up that way with maybe the closer team.
Yeah, that's kind of the game plan that these matchups will probably try to follow. I think the biggest thing out of this, I think the biggest thing that the coaches were looking for was more opportunity. You know, especially for some of these districts where they don't really have like Week 10 playoff games because they just have all of their teams in that particular district comprise the team that's in that particular league, right? So it would be like if the 4A Greater St. Helens League was like an 8-team league, and that would be the only teams in District 4. So if they didn't cross over with anyone. So the WIA has a stipulation that says if your district receives one state berth proportionally, that you could seek an opportunity for a second one with a neighboring district, and the neighboring district has to partner with you. So that's why in the 4A and the 3A, for years, they've gone up and had in other sports, and all the other sports, they go up and play with District 3. And right now that's happening in baseball and soccer and softball. Well, softball will be next week. So that's why they go up to the Tacoma Puyallup area to play those, because proportionally the leagues down here would get one berth to state, and so they can play for an opportunity to get a second one or possibly a third one. But if you're in a district where you receive two, that stipulation is not at play to get a third one. So if you've got two, then you're sort of stuck. And so this is kind of what happens in some districts around the state, and they feel like they want to have their teams get that opportunity to cross over and play somebody, and so this will provide that opportunity.
I imagine you're kind of keeping in mind as you describe that situation, some of the districts over on the east side of the state. How do you think this is going to be received over on the east side of the state, where maybe in the past they've felt like they haven't had that many opportunities to kind of take on the bad boys, the big bad boys over on the west side? And do you think there's an eagerness from the Tri-Cities, the Spokane schools, to have more opportunities to come and match up against teams from Seattle, teams from Tacoma, teams from this area?
Yeah, I think there's been a greater sort of push for teams. Usually teams in football, and especially at the smaller classifications, they tend to schedule their entire schedule geographically. Like, if you're down here in Southwest Washington, if you're playing a 1A schedule, then you go up and you play an Elma or a Tenino in non-league, or maybe you go up and play Life Christian or somebody up in Tacoma, maybe, but you're not going to go all the way up to Bellingham, or you're not going to go all the way to the east. The bigger schools like Camas and Union, they've done that, but the smaller schools have smaller budgets, so they don't do that as often. So I think they saw this as an opportunity to say, okay, for this reason, we'll be willing to go over and play somebody on the other side of the state, or have somebody from the other side come to us. One interesting, I think, example of this. So for years at the 4A level, so there was the 4 districts on the east side that would cross over. That would usually be like 11 of the 16 berths. And then you had District 8, which is the Greater Spokane League, and the Mid-Columbia, which is the Tri-Cities. They would get like 3. And then I think it's the Big 9 Columbia Basin League, which is like Moses Lake, Eastmont, the Wenatchee's, the Yakima schools. They kind of, they received, that district used to receive 2 berths to state every year. And for many years, they said, we'll take those 2 seats, and we won't, they wouldn't play a Week 10 crossover, because those 2 seats are just fine with us. Then those teams would go into state, the state round of 16, and typically lose. I think it was like 2015 or 2016, the last time a team for one of those leagues actually advanced to the quarterfinals. But last year they had a crossover with the other east sides, so they are reaching out, and they're willing to play that crossover in Week 10. And they were also going out in their non-leagues, and they're scheduling outside of their area to get more competition, to get better. So that's an example of a league that's sort of protected in a way with the seeding process, and they're willing to put those automatic berths at risk in this crossover to help their teams get better.
Do you see this as a part of a process of maybe continuing to tweak the format in state, or do you think this is going to be like kind of a change that just sort of stands on its own. Do you think there's a movement to kind of reimagine kind of how these tournaments are put together?
Like an overflow into other sports, you mean?
Yeah, it could be that. Yeah.
Football is unique.
Yeah.
In that you play once a week. And the other sports, the qualifying tournaments like right now it's happening with baseball and softball and soccer, those are multiple layer events. You have to win 1 or 2 or 3 games to get through. And so the logistics of trying to cross over sort of statewide in an event or a tournament that large, it would be a headache and it'd be travel. And there's, there are sort of other financial costs. So I don't know that, I think this is more of a change for football specifically. I think it works. I mean, years ago when I first came up and started working in Washington, I worked in Oregon for about a decade, and then I came up here in 1999, and I had the playoff system that worked back then explained to me. And the way it worked then is that, so the state tournament was the 16 teams, and I think about a decade earlier, they started creating these crossover games, these district crossover games, but there was no window in the schedule for these games. So what they would do is they would play their 9-game regular season. They would finish the last week 9 on Friday. They would play that district crossover on Tuesday. And then they would open the state tournament on Saturday. And I remember having somebody, when I was working up in Olympia, explain that to me. I'm like, what? You play a Tuesday playoff game? And I'm like, yeah, that's what we do, play Tuesday playoff games. After a couple of years of that, the WIAA, and I think the coaches probably got together and they said, what can we do to resolve this? So they, I think about 2004, 2005, they expanded the regular season to 10 weeks. Mm-hmm. And that created this week 10 window. It's actually considered part of the regular season for these crossovers. So you wouldn't be playing these Tuesday playoff games. You'd have another week to play these week 10 playoffs. In week 10, if you don't qualify for the playoffs, you could schedule a non-league game.
And we've seen some teams from here do that.
Some teams will do that. During the COVID, when we came back in, played our first fall season after the COVID, a lot of teams were doing that because they had games scrubbed because of an outbreak or something earlier in the year. I think Prairie did that. They came back and they didn't qualify for the playoffs that year, but they scheduled a week 10 game because they had a game or two earlier canceled. Other teams, like when that first happened, and again about 2004, 2005, a lot of teams would take advantage of that extra game, especially if you had a program that you were trying to build. You would schedule that. I think as time went on, I think most people have decided against the week 10 non-leaguer because of just attrition. It's the end of the season, people are injured and beat up, and they're like, I think 9 weeks is fine for us. And so you don't see them as much anymore. But technically it is part of the regular season. Any team could schedule 10 games. So that's sort of the way it has sort of evolved. And then so I think originally District 4 down here, we used to cross over with District 3, and then discussions would say, hey, let's do District 3 and District 2 and District 1. And that's how it sort of started. It started like that on 4A and 3A. And then 3A invited the east side over because there were so few of them. And they said, yeah, and they made it statewide. 4A is still stuck just west side. And so now it's just kind of like been a sort of a step by step process till we reached this point. And I don't know where it goes from here, if it makes another, change or alteration. But I think it's a good step.
Well, the reaction from coaches has been positive, which really isn't a surprise, being that the driver behind this was the Washington State Coaches Association, and they obviously weren't going to push for a policy change that their members were not in favor of. But what do you think some of the potential criticisms might be if we do this? Maybe someone says there's a tweak here that needs to be made. Where do you think that is going to be? What potential problems do you see in this?
I think the biggest thing is I think it happens at every state's tournament seating is that there's the perceived bias for each geographical area. Like the Seattle schools, they get all the love, or maybe the East Side feel like they don't get the respect, and people maybe some leagues will feel like, oh, every year we have to end up going and playing somebody far away, and but I think if they do this right in the selection process and they take input from a lot, and that the AD from Lake Washington is going to get feedback from the district athletic directors, and they're going to get feedback also from the seating committees that will be seating the teams the following week, and getting input from them, that I think they're going to try to create equitable Week 10 matchups. I think I saw a comment from one coach up in the Tacoma area about this, and essentially said that a lot of times these Week 10 games for the top-ranked teams in the classification, they're lopsided.
Right.
And he basically just said, well, I guess we'll just get to play a lopsided game against somebody else from another part of the state.
We're going to beat up on a new face.
Yeah, so that could happen. But again, I don't think it's a whole lot of different than what we've been seeing here. Usually the number one team from the 4A Greater St. Helens League, they go into Week 10, they're at home. They typically win that. They typically win it comfortably. The outlier was 2 years ago when North Creek came up to Camas and knocked them off. But other than that, going back 10, 12 years, the number one team in the Week 10 from the Greater St. Helens usually does very well. And so other leagues are like that. And then so there'll be other leagues that, might struggle in these Week 10 crossovers, and maybe they'll have second thoughts after that. I don't know, but I think the whole idea is that I think if you're working to get better as a program, as a league, then this is the way to do it. You got to expose your players to other programs around the state, and again, it's such a challenge for football, especially in the smaller schools. With travel is you 40, 50 kids, and the band and the cheerleaders and the whole thing. It's an undertaking to go and take a 3-hour bus drive someplace to play a game. So I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to it. I think I'm interested to see what the matchups are. I think we've seen even in the process with the seating committees for the 16 state tournament games. I used to think that, like a team from District 4 won't play another team from District 4 in the first round of state, but that has happened in the past. So I think they're less shy about those kind of things that they would typically have avoided previously, to try to get the best balance to the bracket and the pairings. So I think that's sort of the sign of what we're going to expect from this thing.
Well, I'm for anything that makes a more exciting postseason. It's one of the favorite parts of the season for not only us, but any football fan out there. And I think it's great that we're already looking ahead to next fall's football season, even while we're in the midst of a very exciting spring season that is reaching the crescendo with district and regional playoffs. So never a bad time to talk football. We'll see how this kind of evolves and manifests next fall, but there's a lot to happen in between now and then, and of course we'll be here to document and to follow it all. Check out throughout the spring playoffs, check out our coverage at 360preps.com. Check out our YouTube channel at 360preps1, where you can get all the interviews, all the highlights, and we'll have some original content related to the All-Region Awards ceremony on June 5th that we have coming up. But as always, follow along, and we will see you next week.